Hello everybody and welcome to the ninth part of What If Naruto Was Neglected by His Family and Trained by Tobirama. I hope you enjoy this What If. Also don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button to stay up to date with the latest episodes. Naruto, Tobirama's heir. Kanahagakure no Sato. Uzumaki Namikaze's households. The usually chirpy and full of life residence to the family of our blonde hero was unusually quiet tonight. There was only one person in the house, sitting quietly and going through the ninjutsu scroll unfurled across his lap. Menma's violet eyes burned the scroll in his memory, his mind kept keenly on the scroll in front of him. He had to learn this, if he wanted to surpass his elder brother in strength. He let out a sigh, when his mind wandered back to the blonde brother of his. No matter how much he trained or tried, his brother always seemed to be a step ahead of him. Plus, he did all of that while being his lazy old self he always was. He had taken his training seriously too, and he knew he was quite strong, but he knew if he was to go against Naruto, the blonde would beat him to the ground and then some. And that thought burned him up. He admired him, but he didn't want to be always in his shadow. With a new vigor, he glared daggers at the scroll on his lap. This was why he had refused to go along with his mother and sister to the gathering of clans at the Inuzuka clan compounds. As soon as he had heard that Naruto wasn't going, and was instead going to his master for extra training, he had done the same in hopes to catch up to him. He wasn't going to let the distance be increased between them anymore. His eyes glanced to the glass door in the living room that led to their open grounds, when he thought he saw something was passed there. His eyes lingered on over the door for a moment longer, before he shrugged it off as the wind blowing past and started reading his scroll again. Once more he saw something was past the kitchen window, and this time he narrowed his eyes there. He turned around in the blink of an eye, back towards the glass door when his ears picked up another whiz. He walked to the glass door and stepped out, his eyes darting around nervously. His gut feeling was telling him something was wrong. He stepped in the middle of the training grounds, and looked around the clearing in between the trees. The silence in the compounds was now impalpable. He knew in his heart that he was surrounded and in trouble. He flicked out a kunai and darted his eyes around sharply, trying to take in as much detail as could, given the low amounts of light in the moonlight-covered field. "I know you're here, no point in playing hide and seek. You cowards better show yourselves," he shouted loudly. He looked around to see if his taunt had worked, and sure enough in a second 4 flickers were seen in front of him. Menma stiffened and dropped into a guarded stance, seeing the 4 people that were standing in front of him. All of them were wearing black cloaks. But what made his heart skip a beat were their masks. Blank masks with strange designs like he hadn't seen ever before, with the leaf A and BU symbols over them. He eyed the 4 warily. The middle one was a kunoichi, judging from her brown long hair and her bodily features. He grew especially nervous when he saw the behemoth of a man by her side. He was almost 7 feet, with a huge muscular build for crying out loud. The rest too weren't so intimidating, but seeing they were A and BU, he was pretty sure they were quite formidable too. The kunoichi, their squad's leader as he suspected, stepped forward a step in front of her team. "Menma Uzumaki, we request you to come with us peacefully," she said in a monotone voice, making him stiffen. He was pretty sure they weren't Leaf A and BU, because they sure as hell didn't hold themselves like these machine-like drones. "And why would I do that?" he asked, running numbers trough his head. He was cornered. They were 4 ANBU prepared and ready to capture him, while he was all alone. Even with all his skills, he was sure he wasn't going to be able to hold off all of them at the same time. There was a reason they were called elites after all. The odds were completely against him at the moment. "Our master wishes to see you. Please escort us peacefully," she said in her same blank voice, and he gripped his kunai tightly, bringing it up to his face. "And if I don't?" he asked nervously, though already knew the answer. The kunoichi stared at him silently, before glancing at her teammates and nodding curtly while looking back at him. "Then we are to bring you in by any means necessary," she said in her drone-like voice, throwing aside her cloak to reveal her slim and feminine body, covered by the standard ANBU uniform used by others in the village. He did note the lack of the ANBU marks on their arms though. He looked at the others. The brute swung off a huge blade, almost as big as Menma himself, from his back. The third one took out 2 blades and attached them to his forearms, and the woman herself flicked out a simple tanto. He gulped nervously when the tension around the clearing became thick, which the kunoichi broke in her monotone voice. Do not wound him fatally, Master wishes to see him alive and well, she barked out compellingly, making the three others nod in unison. Menma took a step back and brought his kunai up to block the deadly metal stars that were being aimed at him. He blocked them quickly and jumped to the side, failing to avoid the slight gash the Anbu with the strange forearm swords made. He couldn't believe how quick they were. At this rate he would be hard-pressed to defend himself, let alone go on the offensive. He ducked down the large swipe from the blunt-edged blade, being swung over him by the brute. He crossed his arms in front of him when the Kunoichi and their team launched a kick to his face but was launched back harshly from the pure strength behind it. His back met the tree's bark roughly and he coughed out wheezingly from the impact. The redhead opened his eyes, and focused his dimming vision back to life. He glared at the four standing there calmly and readying their blades for the next bout. His hand wiped the dirt off his face, and he stood up with a deep breath. "All right, that does it," Kaa-san and Jiraiya said. "Only use it if I was in a life-or-death battle. I guess fighting 4 Anbu by myself can be considered that," he thought and smirked. His eyes closed on themselves when a light yellow sheen broke out around him. The Anbu stiffened when they felt his rising chakra levels, and they all surmised instantly what was going on. He was drawing on his extra reserves now. Menma brought his hands up and clasped them in a snake seal. "Ahhh," he roared and raised his chakra a little more to activate his ability. The yellow sheen around him covered him completely, and added a little glow to his whole body. His unruly crimson hair flailed around when his eyes turned into slits. "Would release, would flow spears," he exclaimed and pushed his palms forward. Wooden spears shot out of his sleeves, and made their way straight to the 4 Anbus who stiffened slightly. Each of them brought their blades forwards and blocked them efficiently. Menma pushed some more chakra, and launched even more deadly spears at them in rapid fire. His eyes widened when he saw them cleave through his jutsu like it was nothing. "The boy is making too much ruckus, let's put him down," the lead kunoichi barked out to the brute who nodded in agreement. Menma noted the four weren't trying to use jutsu at all, most probably to attract as less attention as possible. So this is how Anbu fight. He couldn't help but admire their pure skill and held his snake seal with shaking hands from the force he was exerting. The brute made a beeline for the redhead. Menma saw him jump up and pull his sword back, hiding the blade and making it a deadly jackhammer in the process. He knew the only jutsu that had a chance of blocking it was the one he was still working on currently and was reading a moment ago. He pumped up his chakra and glared at the incoming attack defiantly. He wasn't going down without a fight. "Wood style, wood locking wall," he exclaimed, and thin pillars of wood broke from his feet and started clasping together in a makeshift wall. Menma grimaced at seeing the results. It was supposed to be a perfect shield, but his was just a wooden thing right now. The blunted edge of the made contact with his shield and impacted with a huge bang. Menma was blown back when his jackhammer-like blade made contact with the ground, and the shock wave alone threw him back like a rag doll. His blurry eyes focused into his front only to see the Anbu with the forearm-like blades rushing to him, most probably to knock him out, and a volley of shurikens incoming from his other side to knock him out. He knew he was done. There was no way he could possibly stop both of them, and closed his eyes in defeat. The Anbu knew it too. Clang, clang. Clang, slash, clang. The voices rang throughout the clearing. Menma's eyes snapped open to see the back of his brother standing in front of him on the hilt of his sword, his arms crossed and his silky blonde hair flowing slowly in the wind. He glanced down to see the tip of his blade. Having embedded the shurikens right through their holes and into the ground, they stopped their spinning a moment later. He heard a slight grunt and saw past his brother, only to see the Anbu with the strange forearm blades clutching his left shoulder, that now had a deep gash on his right bicep and was bleeding profusely. He saw the four jump back and regroup at seeing this new development, and turned his eyes to his brother, who jumped down and pulled out his sword from the ground, holding it to his side, making the blade shine slightly in the moonlight, making him quite an intimidating sight to behold. "Show off," he muttered in annoyance with a pained gasp, feeling his swollen waist, and stood up shakily. Naruto smirked hearing his brother's first words, and was glad he was all right and fit enough for his snide remarks too. "I leave you just for a couple of hours, and you bring 4 unknown Anbu to fight in the house," his lazy voice drawled out, making Menma's eye twitch at his words. He stood up fully and took his brother's side while flicking out a kunai. I didn't call them, these creeps attacked me first, saying some creep they call their master wanted to meet me, he said angrily, and saw his brother not retorting with any of his usually playful and lazy responses. I see. Naruto said in such a serious voice, it made Menma glance at his brother curiously. He saw his brother's eyes not shining with their usually mischievous and happy glint, instead were deadly serious and icy as glaciers. It almost made him shiver at the confidence he was holding in front of such strong opponents. Naruto glanced around the battlefield and saw several wooden shards all around the grounds. It didn't take a genius to put two and two together. You used Mokuton, he asked seriously, and got a simple nod from his brother. Any other day, Naruto would have chewed him out for revealing it to an enemy, but when he saw his brother's condition and his opponent's conditions even after using his abilities, he couldn't blame him. Naruto knew that if his brother hadn't even made a scratch on these masked men even while going all out, they were the real deal and not some wannabes wearing masks and ANBU armors. His mind had started calculating all the possibilities and strategies in his mind. He was on his home turf and knew the grounds like the back of his hand. That was advantage number one. His brother's condition was a disadvantage, but their opponents had an injured member too and Menma's wound weren't grave, so he could still fight. That was a plus in his mind too. They had only a limited amount of time if Naruto could, and he would alert the ANBU nearby them, as soon as he had the chance. His mind was brought back to the opponents when their lead Kunoichi spoke up. Naruto namikaze, she said monotonously and Naruto said nothing. His mind was still thinking of the many strategies he could pull off and how to go about fighting them. What do you want? He asked to buy himself some time, and saw the four stand silently for a moment before she spoke up. Our master wishes to meet your little brother. We are to take him there by any means necessary. Please do not interfere, for our master regards you highly, and would not be pleased if you were injured gravely in our fight, she said monotonously, and Naruto stood silently. Her tone, their way of machine-like precision in postures. He had an inkling of an idea of who this master was. And if he was right then this wasn't going to be pretty. Tell Danzo, my brother doesn't want to meet him and Naruto namikaze sends his regards through his lackeys, he said coldly and saw the brute behind her stiffen slightly as soon as he mentioned that cripple's name. Menma wanted to know how his brother knew this Danzo but that was a talk for another time, he reminded himself. Bingo. Naruto thought inwardly, while the Kunoichi was now regarding him seriously. The boy wasn't like his brother, and was eyeing them like a hawk eyed its prey. Moreover, there wasn't an ounce of fear in his azure eyes. A calm opponent was a deadly opponent. This was taught to all root ANBUs and she was now taking him a bit more seriously than his brother. I request you to stand down and let this go peacefully. We have not been ordered to harm your brother, just to escort him peacefully, her voice rang out for a final ultimatum, which the blonde ignored with a smirk. The plan was now set in his mind. Menma, you take the two on the right, leave the lead Kunoichi and brute to me, he whispered to him, and raised his sword in front of him, dropping in his stance. Menma wanted to argue about him taking on their strongest all on his own, but now wasn't the time. He himself was injured and his brother was strong enough to take care of himself. Plus, his mind at strategies on the fly was unparalleled. He was the only one he could trust his back to right now. All right, leave those two to me. Was all he could say before Naruto was off in a blur. He slashed and met his blade with the Kunoichis and both jumped up as the huge blade passed under them, courtesy of the brute. Menma jumped forward and launched a kick to the injured ANBU's arm who blocked and grimaced, jumping back. He threw a kunai at the fourth ANBU and made him jump back as both the brothers divided them up to their liking. The Kunoichi leader was glaring daggers at Naruto from underneath her mask. Everything was going perfectly, until he had come into the fight and turned it around completely. She saw what he was doing, divide and conquer. The oldest and most effective strategy to date. But it wouldn't work on them, since it gave her the perfect situation she needed right now. She and her partner would take out the Naruto while his brother held off her other partners, and then go to capture his weakened and exhausted brother like they wanted to. It was the perfect plan in her mind. Naruto's Sharingan blazed to life, unknown to the two of them. He could predict what that Kunoichi was thinking, and it was right of her to think that. He wasn't stupid enough to think he could take those two on head-on and win. But a shinobi's way was that of deception. And he had many advantages in his favor right now. The pieces were set, and now it was time to start the game. He watched the kunoichi crouch a little and flick out a volley of shurikens at him. He brought his sword forward, his Sharingan enabling him to predict each and every one of their paths. His blade met each star with deadly precision, always at the last moment, and jumped up when he heard a whiz from behind him. The large blade passed underneath him harmlessly, and his eyes widened as he twisted in midair suddenly. His Sharingan narrowed in on the thin chakra-laced wire that was aimed to cleave his neck off right now. The kunoichi was shocked that he had seen her invisible wire attack, and launched a kick to the blonde's chest. Naruto could only bring his blade forward to block in midair, and was launched back harshly. He twisted himself, mid-air, with the agility akin of a cat. His feet made contact with the brute's large chest when he let out a smirk. He pumped a burst of chakra to his feet and the brute was thrown back from the sudden contact. Naruto jumped forward and brought his blade down at the female Anbu, who blocked it and held him at a stalemate. She broke off their encounter with a wild slash, which Naruto back-flipped efficiently and stood in front of her with a smirk. The Anbu knew something was up, seeing his smirk, and was on her guard. His right hand blurred through 6 single-handed seals, shocking her to the core. Single-handed seals. Genin don't have the required chakra control for that, she thought in shock, and watched him breathe in a deep breath. Fire style, grand fireball jutsu, he exclaimed and launched a humongous fireball at the shocked kunoichi. The brute jumped in front of her and brought his large blade forward as a shield. The jutsu impacted with his blade and created a huge blast, launching the two back from the shock wave it created. Naruto though smirked happily at the outcome. He loved it when a plan came together. That should wake up the neighbors. He thought with a smirk, and wasn't surprised when he saw the two mostly unharmed Anbu in front of him. The brute's blade glowed a little with the heat it had endured, and his arms were burnt from the intense heat he had just blocked, rendering them almost inept for battle. The female lead Anbu knew now she had to take the boy seriously. She didn't want to kill him for fear of angering her master, but he was too big of a threat with his extraordinary skills to be left alive or to be taken lightly in this battle for that matter. With Menma. Menma swiped his kunai at the Anbu, putting in all his strength, and the Anbu grimaced when he blocked the blow with his injured arm. He jumped back to gain a little distance, when he saw his partner regrouping with him and tried to heal him a little. "Your brother will be killed unless you surrender," the injured Anbu said, and Menma couldn't help but snort. The Anbu, however, ignored his response and continued. "He is fighting the most skilled and feared kunoichi in our ranks, head on. She specializes in silent assassinations and infiltration tactics. You should surrender, and his life might be spared," he reasoned with the red head, who now grew a little nervous hearing that. As much as was loath to admit it, maybe Naruto might. His thoughts trailed off when the three of them turned and saw the huge blast rack their clearing. Menma let out a cocky smirk, and pulled out another kunai to go at it again when he saw his brother standing there confidently and relatively unharmed. "You should worry about your own leader, my brother is quite exceptional himself. There is a reason I look up to him after all," he said in determination, and launched forward to keep up with the plan. With Naruto. Naruto saw the brute go aside with a limp, and knew he was out for the count and was only standing there for standby support. He narrowed his eyes at the kunoichi, who was now holding her sword single-handedly and taking out shurikens with the other. "Prepare to die," she said coldly, and launched the 3 shurikens at him. Naruto was about to sidestep, when he narrowed his eyes and his tomo spun wildly to slow down his perception drastically. He realized what she was trying to do and stood his ground. He brought his sword up and sidestepped the stars at the last possible second, launching forward towards the kunoichi, who jumped back and took onto a branch of a tree, throwing some more shurikens. Again his Sharingan picked up the slight difference in normal shurikens and these ones, and sidestepped them at the last possible moment and tried to attack her. She met his blade this time, and both engaged in a spar of pure kenjutsu. Naruto jumped back when she tried to overpower him with her experienced style of swords, and narrowed his eyes when he saw her launch even more shurikens at him. This time though, they were simple shurikens, he noted, and twisted his body in mid-air to dodge them, and saw the final 3 he won't be able to dodge. His Sharingan saw them in slow motion, right until the last moment when their holes converged themselves and he threw his sword right in their middle. This is the power of the Sharingan, he thought, smirking inwardly at how much it was now integrated with each and every one of his battle styles. The sword's blade took the shurikens with it, pinning them to the ground right through their holes, halting them to a spinning stop, and he fell on top of the hilt of his sword, crossing his arms with a smirk. "Is that all you've got?" he asked in taunt, and noticed he was now in the middle of a small clearing of trees. The kunoichi smirked and jumped in front of him. "You are skilled indeed, Naruto-san, but this is the end of the line," she said blankly, and flicked her fingers slightly, making the ninja wires covering him from everywhere like a web of a spider shine into view purposefully. His eyes widened in shock, making the kunoichi smirk slightly behind her mask. She brought up her sword to a shining wire, and applied pressure to it. "You were trapped from the moment I first attacked you," she explained blankly, and cut the wire to activate her trap. She smirked when one by one they all started tripping and closing in on the shocked blonde. A moment later she felt her wrist being pulled, and glanced down to see her own wires tangling her. What the dash, she couldn't finish, when all the trapping wires trapped her limbs and neck tightly in a trap that she had set for the blonde. She glared at the blonde and let out a loud shriek when the wire around her neck drew blood slowly and stood as still as possible. Checkmate. And that is how you play the game. Naruto thought happily, when his plans started coming through to their final stages now. "It was a good trap indeed, Kunoichi-san," Naruto commented with an appreciative tone, and jumped down from the hilt of his sword, pulling it out, sheathing it completely in a slick motion. "How," she grunted in pain, as with each movement the wires tightened themselves and were about to cleave her in many parts of her body. "I saw the wires you attached to the shuriken the moment you threw them. With each throw of your wired shurikens that I dodged, I deflected them ever so slightly with my blade, to my own liking. You were never trapping me, it was always the other way around," he explained, making the kunoichi stunned to the core. "Impossible, no one can see my wires, they are too thin for normal humans to see," she grunted in pain, and tried to buy some time for her partner to come. "I have sharp eyes is all I can say. Plus, shuriken jutsu is my specialty." "You picked the worst possible opponent for yourself," he said with a smirk, when he saw the wires painfully tighten, and he turned around, not wishing to see the bloodbath it would cause in a moment. She was cursing him to hell inwardly, and was wondering where the hell her partner really was. She heard a loud bang and glanced to the side to see an explosion rock near the lake. "Ahhh," she heard her partner scream, and grew confused. Who the hell was he fighting? "Well, my exploding clones and Akira took care of your partner quite nicely. So I guess this is it," he said once more, shocking her completely. He had this all planned from the start. "We were never even close," she thought incredulously, and with a bit of admiration for him. At least she had fallen to a worthy opponent. "Never underestimate an opponent," he said lazily, left the rest hanging, putting his hands in his pockets when the kunoichi spoke up. "Especially when you ambush an opponent on his home grounds. For that is what the Shinobi Rule 39 states," she completed stoically, and Naruto started walking away slowly, his hair shadowing his eyes in sadness and regret at what was about to ensue in a moment. She closed her eyes in defeat and accepted her final moments. Squelch. Naruto grimaced and closed his eyes, not turning around, and jumped on a branch to go and see his brother, who was still fighting them. He reminded himself, a shinobi never shows emotions on a battlefield, and jumped away, masking his emotions completely. With Menma. He jumped down in the clearing and saw his brother impale the already injured Anbu with another wooden spear in his other arm. The other Anbu, who was most probably their healing and support ninja, stood by his side. Naruto and the fourth Anbu senses tingled at the same time. Many heavy chakra signatures were narrowing in on them, and both of them knew who it was. Anbu, both of them thought in unison. The two Anbu glared at the two brothers, and stood silently for a few moments in a stare-off. "Naruto Namikaze." The uninjured Anbu spoke up, when he realized his team members who were fighting him couldn't be sensed anymore. Naruto rose an eyebrow when he saw the drone speaking. "We will keep an eye on you from the shadows. You are hiding much more than meets the eye," he said emotionlessly, and disappeared along with his partner in a smokeless shunshin. A moment later, they were surrounded by several teams of Anbus from all sides. The one bearing a bear mask stood forward. "What happened over here?" he asked in a commanding voice, and Menma grunted and rubbed his swollen arm. He glanced to the side to see Naruto have some slashes all over his body, most probably that came in between his own skirmishes. We were ambushed. For masked men came to capture me, the redhead explained, getting a nod from Bear. Can you tell us something more about them? He asked, and Menma shrugged, too tired and injured to really care right now. Naruto too had the same thoughts and just wanted to sleep right now, but this was important information he had to provide. Well, they were Root Anbu and were sent by Danzo himself, he said lazily, making them all stiffen and stare at the blonde incredulously. That complicated things, Bear thought, and walked up to Naruto. Naruto Namikaze, you are coming with us, he said, and Naruto and Menma were about to protest, when he clasped Naruto's shoulder harshly. Boar, take all the evidences from the battlefield and report them to Hokage-sama. I shall take Namikaze-san in for further questioning, he said in an order, and disappeared along with the blonde. Menma rushed to the spot his brother was a moment earlier. He turned his eyes around to the others who were now jumping out and taking evidences from the clearings. Where did you take my brother? He screamed harshly to Boar, who said nothing and went about his work. Though they all stopped when they heard a shout from behind them. Menma was all he heard, when he turned around and was pulled into a bone-crushing hug. He flailed his arms around wildly, gasping for air while Kushina was holding him in a death grip. She broke the hug, making the boy sigh in relief, when she cupped his cheeks and started kissing him all over it. He tried to pry off his hysterical mother off, but to no avail. What happened here? She asked him with teary eyes, seeing his condition and how their grounds looked like they were a battlefield. Ka-san, 4 Anbu came to capture me and take me with them. I almost lost to them when Naruto. Was all he could say when he heard Kushina gasp, and her eyes roamed all around. Where is he? She asked him with a bitten lip in nervousness. He turned his furious eyes to Boar, who was now sweating bullets behind his mask. Kushina saw his gaze and narrowed her eyes on the Anbu, increasing his nervousness tenfold. These bastards took him with them. Some Anbu with a bear mask said they needed to question him. We tried to stop them, but he couldn't finish because Kushina had struck out a chakra chain and pulled the Anbu to her, face to face. She was too angry right now to scold the boy for his bad language. Where the hell is my baby? She asked in a deadly quiet voice, making him gulp nervously. He would currently be in Anbu HQ for questioning. He trailed off, when he saw her hair flail around in 9 tails. Her murderous violet orbs glared at him as if she was the Shinigami herself. On what grounds? You had better have a good reason for taking in the heir to a clan in for questioning, without even consulting his clan head or guardians first, she spoke coldly, making him gulp again. Yuck Kushina-sama, he said something about Root. He stuttered in fright, making Kushina's eyes narrow in on him dangerously. Danzo, why am I not surprised? So that is the bastard who has attacked my boys. She thought, and glared at the man. Another Anbu jumped down by their side and spoke up nervously, seeing the situation. Boar, there are 2 mangled corpses in the fields. Most probably Root, since their bodies have activated their curse seals, he said dutifully, making Kushina's eyes widen in horror. The second Anbu yelped and was yanked in a chakra chain himself, while her worried eyes turned to Menma, who was looking at the ground guiltily. Naruto did it, he whispered sadly, making her clench her eyes in agony. Her boy had made his first kill, and instead of having her there to talk to her, he was being questioned in Anbu HQ. Her eyes turned to the 2 shivering Anbu and glared at them. Let's go and meet the Hokage, she said coldly, and turned to Menma, who smiled a little and nodded, already knowing what she was about to say. He went inside and she disappeared in a swirl of water along with the 2 Anbus. Kanahagakure no Sato. Anbu HQ holding cells. The Anbu headquarters, one of the most secure and hidden holding facilities. Accessible only to the tier of the village truly held up to their reputations and names. Armed with the security of the village's elite, the Anbu Black Ops themselves, it was the go-to place for some of the most high-class criminals that the Leaf had in its captivity. However, the presence of a 14-year-old genin in the holding facility wasn't an everyday occurrence in here. Come on now, get in, boy, an Anbu wearing the bear mask over his face pushed the blonde in harshly and closed the bars behind him with a slam. Bastard. Naruto couldn't help but mutter. The Anbu though heard it loud and clear and clenched his fists in anger. What did you say? He hissed, and Naruto turned to him, annoyance and irritation written clear across his face. He was tired, bruised, beaten and exhausted. That wasn't to say that he had just made his first kill, so it wasn't a surprise that one of the most calm and lazy personalities in the village was a bit snappy at the moment. "You heard me, big guy, you want to make something of it?" Naruto taunted him in a proud voice and confident voice. He would usually just rather ignore all these snide remarks, but after going through what he had just now, he wasn't in the mood to play goody-goody with Bear right now. The ANBU captain in question bristled in unrestrained fury. Even the several ANBU patrolling the hallways were snickering at his expense. It wasn't every day that an ANBU captain was talked to this way by a newly minted genin. "Why you dash?" he growled, clenching the bars, and Naruto stood his ground with an icy glare. All the present ANBU were surprised at how the boy seemed to be holding his own and not in the least bit afraid of disrespecting the blonde. "Thank Kami that you're behind those bars. Just bearing your father's name doesn't make the hotshot you tend to be," he retorted back furiously, and Naruto's eyes turned murderous. He took steps towards the bar and stood face to face with the bear-shaped ANBU mask, his Sharingan blazing to life unknown to all but him as soon as a taunt to his father was made. All the guards were surprised when they felt killing intent that matched the one Bear was leaking coming off from the blonde. "Why don't you open these bars then? I'll show you how big of a hotshot I really am." "What do you say, big guy?" he snarled back, and the whole hallway felt the thick tension rising between the two each passing moment. Bear couldn't believe how a rookie genin was even standing, let alone talking back to him and making a fool out of him while he was leaking his own killing intent. "Alright, that's enough. Break it, OFF," a voice boomed from the side, making the two turn their glances to the source of said voice. Naruto saw a large man wearing a leather trench coat and several scars adorned over his face. His head was covered with a large bandana, while Naruto's Sharingan picked up on his movement muscles and his chakra reserves that were suppressed and controlled. He was an elite jounin for sure, no doubt about it, he surmised, and looked back to see Bear turning back and looking on to the new men face to face. "What have you brought him here for, Bear?" the large man asked, and Bear nodded. His anger lay forgotten and his duty senses kicked in. "Sir, this boy has apparently fought some rogue ANBUs and claims that they belong to the disbanded Root organization," he said dutifully, making the superior man's eyes widen momentarily. Root was a well-kept secret even when it was still being functioned, so a newly minted genin proclaiming to have knowledge of such village secrets was a surprise in itself. But he couldn't decipher the complete situation based on half-arsed information. His black eyes turned to the blonde boy, who was looking at him with narrowed and calculative eyes that a child his age shouldn't possess. He hadn't felt such eyes other than when his superiors scrutinized him for something. And that really was a rare occurrence, mind you. "Bring him into the interrogation room and call my apprentice too. We'll talk there," he commanded, and Bear nodded, smirking behind his mask when he turned to the blonde, who was glaring daggers at the large man's back. Bear opened the cell and pulled the blonde harshly, who was struggled to walk through his violent pushes. Bear couldn't care less, as this was the chance of a lifetime to get some fun with the boy. Naruto walked through the well-lit hallways slowly, with slight stumbles from those pushes every now and then. All around the building were simple hallways having white walls and simple prison cells, along with several sealed rooms. His Sharingan was still activated, unknown to everyone, while he was etching each and every little detail about the secured wing, burning it all in with his photographic memory granted to him by his eyes. That was one thing Tobirama had drilled into his head over the years: no matter the situation you're in, Northwest matter the place you're in, always scour whatever information you could. For it could be crucial at some point in the future when you least expect it to be. Bear stopped in front of a steel door and opened it. Naruto stumbled and fell down when Bear gave him a violent push in, along with tripping his feet to go along with it completely. Naruto glared at the ANBU that he hated with all his being at that moment and looked around the dank room. It was a dark room, a single bulb hanging from the room, the lone source of light in there at the moment. All the walls seemed to be made out of pure concrete, and there were two wooden chairs along with a simple table in the middle. The only objects in the dank room. It would have been quite intimidating for Naruto, had he not been expecting this same thing beforehand. After all, this was the classic interrogation room in almost all stories and movies he had seen over the years. How original. He muttered to himself dryly and stood up, his hands still in metal handcuffs. He made his way to a chair and plopped down over it with a tired sigh. So this is what I get for fighting rogue ANBU who were after my life and getting rid of them. Well, they sure are scoring points on the guest treatment department, he thought bitterly with a scowl on his usually happy face. His mood was worsening over here by the minute. And to top it off, these bastards were doing the very thing he despised with his very being. Ordering him around, pushing him into a corner as if he was their possession. That was one thing he despised with his very being. He was a free boy who loved freedom in everything he did, and this wasn't on one of his favorite lists. His thoughts were broken off when the door opened, making him squint his eyes from the new bright light before it was closed, and two people walked in. The large man from before took a seat in front of him, slamming a tape recorder on the table and a clipboard kept at his friend's hands. Behind him was a woman, no doubt the apprentice he was talking about from earlier. Well, let's get this thing started, he said in a professional manner, making Naruto's eyes turn to him though he remained silent and calm. Flushing his anger out of his system, he remembered all the things Tobirama had taught him about being in an enemy territory and being interrogated for information you didn't want to give. And right now he wasn't going to give these creeps any information whatsoever until he had talked it out with the old man. Now he thanked his old man inwardly for the lesson he had once seen as dank and boring but had been forced to learn by his master and by proxy, which was now going to come in handy. He had his pride on the line here with how they were treating him, and he would be damned if he let it go on any further. Name, he asked professionally to start in a casual manner since he wasn't an enemy shinobi or anything, and Naruto stared at him blankly, making him feel quite stupid from that stare. Even the woman was staring at him blankly, and he coughed in his hand, feeling a bit embarrassed now. Look at his protocol, so we have to follow it, he said stoically, trying to keep his dignity intact, and Naruto still remained silent. The large man couldn't help but praise the boy inwardly at the completely blank and emotionless expression he was holding at the moment. Even he could not read what was going on through his head currently. It is usually polite to give your own introduction first before asking for someone else's. At least that was what I was taught growing up, not so sure about you though, Naruto remarked dryly, making the man's eye narrow in on him. He was definitely Kakashi's student, all right. Both could annoy him with these dry and aloof remarks anytime. He glared to the side when he heard the slight giggles coming from his apprentice with a look that said, "You're not helping me any." He turned back to the boy to see his firm eyes that didn't seem to budge from his intense stare. The boy's good, he thought, and nodded after a moment. But he still needed to get this over with as soon as possible. Very well, I'm Ibiki Marino, the head of ANBU's torture and interrogation unit. My friend here is Anko Mitarashi, my second-in-command and personal apprentice, he said, pointing to his right, and Naruto glanced at the exotically dressed Kunoichi for a moment, only to shiver inwardly at her sadistic smile, and got a wave in return. Yo, she chirped happily, making Naruto sweat drop at the happy girl. Was she really an interrogator? But he knew better than to make assumptions on looks and first impressions alone. Naruto Namikaze, he said simply, and the two looked at him curiously but became embarrassed when they realized he was done and looked at each other before turning back to him. All right, Naruto-san. So to get started, what was the level of the opponents you faced tonight? He asked, and couldn't help but think what the boy was thinking right now. His face wasn't giving anything away, and that was saying something, since he had cracked a lot of hard nuts with his intense stares alone that had seemingly no effect on this rookie genin. All three were silent for a few moments, with the adults thinking he was taking time to mull over their question. However, the answer they got wasn't what they were expecting. I'm not obliged to answer your question, he replied simply, making the two adults blink. They stared at him incredulously and blinked again. Excuse me? I think I didn't quite get you, Ibiki said in disbelief, making Naruto nod slowly. Then I repeat, I'm not obliged to answer your question, he said simply yet again, and this time Ibiki's eyes narrowed in on him. There weren't many people who would like to play hardball with him. And why is that? He asked calmly, but was a little perturbed by the blonde on his inside. He couldn't, for the life of him, predict what he was going to say next. Do next. He cursed that scarecrow of a sensei of his. He was rubbing off on him in all the wrong ways. A few more months and the boy would be wearing a face mask while reading his precious gold all the time. But he looked up when the blonde in the questioning seat spoke up. Because this interrogation is based on ground so loose, I'm sure Lord Hokage will have a field day with you all. And if he doesn't, my mother and old men surely will, he answered him calmly, without a hint of emotion in his voice. Ibiki leaned forward with a raised eyebrow, putting his chin over his hands. Now this was one answer no one had given him before. And this was a pretty new way of landing a threat over him of all people. "Oh, and how is that if I may ask?" he asked dryly, disbelief and amusement etched completely in his voice. Naruto's eyes turned icy, surprising the two at his intense stare he was giving them right now. As Konohagakure no Sato's charter, laid down by the mutual agreement of the Shodai Hokage and the daimyo himself, says in Article 21b Section C subsection A. The rules for interrogating a prisoner who isn't accused of anything that has been done against the village or might harm the village in any ways can only be interrogated within the presence of the Hokage himself, or through his direct orders that are first shown to the appointed victim unless arrested in by the village, and only if, when he is accused on grounds of treason with viable evidences in their midst. And I for one, am on the first stance that I haven't done anything tonight that can be considered grounds for treason. As such, this whole interrogation is seemingly useless and completely illegal, he answered calmly. Complete and utter silence reigned in on the floors of the interrogation cell. Even a pin drop could have been heard in the room, had there been a pin actually dropped. Ibiki was staring at him wide-eyed. He for one didn't know how to respond or say anything to the blonde, who had just stated a small paragraph from the 1,000-page charter of the village's founding laws as if it was a recital poem. Anko, though, was stupefied at his words. Never before had she heard a boy, his age she might add, recite a village law word to word, and she was quite sure she didn't even remember what the village charter actually was. He broke out of his stupor when Anko let out a wolfish whistle towards the blonde and giggled happily. Now that was something to make my man Ibiki go silent in an interrogation. "I like the little gaki," she said in giggles, and got a death glare from her accomplice for her words. That once more weren't helping the tense situation any. He turned back to the blonde and smirked inwardly. The blonde really was something else, for never before had someone pulled that card on him, and his words had grounds of heavy consideration too. But not this time. He held his hand out to Anko, who stared at him blankly. He broke off from his stare-off with the blonde and looked at Anko's innocent expression, making his eyes twitch in annoyance. "Anko," he growled out, not in the mood for her antics right now. "Ibiki," she continued innocently, not getting his point, and a tick mark appeared on his forehead. Naruto watched the two in complete amusement from the sidelines. Now this he had to see for himself. "The papers for permission of interrogation signed by Lord Hokage himself, if you would please," he continued patiently, though his patience were running quite thin right about now. "What papers?" Anko asked in pure innocence, making him look at her incredulously. She had done this with him 1,000 times with him, right? "The papers that Bear must have handed to you for the holding and interrogation on one Naruto Namikaze," he answered, barely holding his thin patience on line, and all he got was an innocent stare with a pout from his apprentice. "That idiot didn't give me nothing, Ibiki. I thought he handed those to you. After all, you called for me here, remember?" she asked him with a pointed finger, making him look at her incredulously. He hadn't gotten any orders to, for that matter, none officially signed by the Hokage. "There aren't any official orders, because no one got them or was issued any," the ever-calm voice of Naruto rang in the room, making Ibiki look at him incredulously. Though Naruto continued on undeterred of the man's stare. "Bear, as you called him, picked me up straight from my house as soon as I mentioned the word root to that idiot. As such, there are no official orders, and my words from earlier stand true," he finished calmly, and Ibiki rubbed his forehead and pinched his nose with a sigh. This was utterly humiliating and embarrassing for the entire Black Ops unit. No doubt Kushina would raise hell over kidnapping a clan heir from his home grounds, done by them no less, in the council, and she had clear grounds to do so. And the Hokage would be out for next to handle the perpetrators in question. He would be in that list too, since his trust in his accomplices had led to this situation getting this far out of control. Why the hell would that idiot Bear ANBU? He growled to himself, but was surprised when an answer came from in front of him. "Probably to take out his grudge on me. I'm not the most liked around person in the village, you know," he said pointedly, making Ibiki slap his forehead in exasperation. That damned idiot was so damn unprofessional. He was personally going to see through his suspension now. Click. Naruto looked up surprised and rubbed his now freed wrists to turn his eyes to the softly smiling Kunoichi, who ruffled his hair playfully. "Not everyone thinks of you that way, Gaki. Count me in one of those, K. she asked him, with her usual grin, and Naruto couldn't help but smile at the eccentric kunoichi. Arigato Mitarashi-san, he said politely, making her grin sadistically before she was wrapped up all over him and rubbing his cheek with hers. Naruto turned beet red at the completely pressed kunoichi now resting on his lap and so close to him, barely holding on to his pride and dignity right now. What's with the formalities, Gaki? Don't you like your sexy friend Anko-chan? She purred sexily in his ear, and Naruto's sweat dropped at her bipolar nature, feeling quite uncomfortable now with the two large mounds pressed seductively on his chest. Ibiki decided to stop her before she went out of control, and he wouldn't be able to save the boy from her when she got going. Anko, stop your antics now, he is a kid. Do you want to be considered a pedophile? I for one don't think so, asked Ibiki dryly, making her pout childishly before she licked Naruto's cheek sexily, involuntarily making the blonde shiver and feel completely helpless at her erotic actions. Is this how his Heim felt when he teased her? He couldn't help but think that, but crushed his thoughts instantly when he saw her licking her lips with a bloodthirsty gaze that made his insides twist, and his mask was now on the verge of falling apart completely. No, this woman's plain old crazy, he thought instantly, and sighed in relief when she was off of him and grinning at his crimson cheeks like crazy, feeling quite proud of her skills and bodily features right now. Naruto couldn't help but look away from that utterly revealing mesh suit that she was displaying all the more heavily now by pressing her arms together near her chest to make her cleavage a lot more revealing, not like it wasn't already. What the hell was wrong with that lady? So now can I leave? He asked Ibiki, the exhaustion of his day finally catching up to him, and to get away from a grinning Anko. The man, though, as much as he wanted to say yes and be done with this mess, shook his head. I'm sorry, kid, but you have been signed into the holding cells officially. So I will have to go to Hokage-sama and get your release papers signed. You can stay in the holding cells, I'll get you one of the nicer ones and some food too. So don't worry, just let me clear out this mess, he said, and Naruto nodded with a tired sigh. This was really getting bothersome and he just wanted to go home now. Anko, take him to his cell and get him settled in. I'll go straight to the tower and clear this up myself. She motioned a finger to him in a seductive manner and walked with a sway of her hips. Naruto looked at Ibiki blankly, giving him his sensei's patented look, who sighed tiredly. Don't worry, you'll be fine, she is just playful is all. He reasoned, but saw the boy was not really convinced when the girl in question was licking her lips and calling him to hurry it up. A bit too playful, but harmless nonetheless, he continued on, and this time Naruto nodded hesitantly, satisfied a bit by the large man's answer. He walked with Anko, who just made small talk with him, putting in her own suggestive remarks that made him flustered at her blunt words each time and got laughs from said kunoichi. Finally, they stopped in front of a cell which the Violet opened up for him, putting her hands on her hips. All right, Gaki, this is your abode for now, enjoy. She chirped happily, making Naruto relieved that at least the bed looked like it had a mattress and wasn't all steel. He looked back to see the grinning kunoichi, who was still standing there, and shivered inwardly when she licked her lips seductively. Or I can stay with you and show you a nice time, you know, pop your cherry and all, she said sexily, making all the blood in his body rush up to his cheeks. What? What the hell is wrong with you? He shouted, completely flushed like his adorable kitten when she was teased by him, and his eye twitched when she just laughed wholeheartedly at his reactions. He was just too easy for her. He slammed the bars shut, which was quite ironical that someone wanted to get locked up so hurriedly. But he wasn't willing to take any chances with that kunoichi, she wasn't normal, that's for sure. All right, Gaki, I'll send some food later on, so sleep a little, all right? It's quite late already, she waved him, walking down the hallways. He winced when he heard a crack and a man's scream, followed by Anko's laugh, who cackled, no touching, out loud. He had a fairly good idea of what must have happened and fell down on bed face first. Finally. So how was your first interrogation? A new voice trailed off in the middle of the dead silent room when the blonde yelped and fell down on the floor face first, completely shocked at the new presence, no doubt. Tobirama watched the twitching blonde on the floor with a sweat drop. Wasn't he supposed to be a censor and all? Naruto rubbed his aching nose and glared at the stoic Senju sitting on the chair as if he was in a park, sitting on a bench. How long have you known wait, scratch that, how long have you been observing me? He asked him in an accusing tone, knowing the man's thinking process after observing them so closely for years. Tobirama just shrugged carelessly, and Naruto knew he won't be getting anything else out of the man now. He could be quite annoying like that when he wanted to. "So I heard you had an interesting night." Tobirama spoke, changing the subject to what he wanted to hear right now. Instantly he saw the slight changes in the boy's features, who now looked a bit downtrodden. "I killed 2 of them," he said simply, already knowing the man in front of him knew everything else. Tobirama said nothing and leaned back in his chair, his eyes gazing at the ceiling with a slight furrowing of eyebrows. "That isn't like you," he started. Seeing the boy's even more solemn look, he knew something else was up. "You would avoid pointless slaughter. What really happened?" he asked in his calm voice, containing a hint of concern for the pupil he saw as his son in all ways but blood. "They attacked Menma, so I tried to stop them as best as I possibly could have, and almost succeeded," he whispered shamefully. Tobirama hung on to his every word. First kills were what made or break most shinobi careers as they came to realize what this life was really about. "I trapped the kunoichi leader. The girl tried to weave a shurikenjutsu trap on me and I countered it subtly to trap her instead. I restrained that huge bulky guy with my exploding clones, and Akira too had gotten a lot of hits on him," he continued on his tale, making Tobirama nod. He wouldn't say it right now seeing the situation, but he was proud of the way the boy had gone about executing the fight. Show as little as you can and maximize the outcome with the least possible moves. Efficiency, precision, and stealth. The true marks of a shinobi. That was what he had taught him most of all, and he was proud that his student had embraced it to heart. "What happened then?" he asked calmly, and for the first time Naruto raised his head to uncover his shadowed azure eyes, that were shimmering with tears on the verge of dropping now. "The kunoichi in the trap was trapped in such a way that each movement caused the trap to tighten itself on her to the point of being fatal, and I warned the big ANBU that if he didn't surrender then I would blow him." He trailed off in sobs, and Tobirama now understood everything. The boy never did have a heart akin to a killer, but now he knew what had happened truly, which was what had him in a loop when he had heard of what had transpired tonight after his disciple had left his residence. The boy had engaged, trapped, and given his enemies a fair chance to surrender and become captives to live another day. But they were root. Their primary objective was mission success or obliterating all traces that could lead back to their sources. Even their lives. "I didn't kill them, old man. I gave them a chance, but the kunoichi, she just didn't." He sobbed hysterically, and Tobirama pulled his face in his chest and let the boy cry it all out. It was for the better if he let it all out and didn't bottle it up. And now that he knew what had truly happened, he was even prouder of his student. The boy really did live up to each expectation he held for him and surpassed them each time. This time was no different, but this time it had led to a change. A change in him. The boy had finally grown up and become a true shinobi, now taking his first steps in the crimson paths of this dark life. "I'm not a monster, old man. I'm no demon. I didn't want to kill them. I swear," he mumbled in between his wails, and Tobirama's heart clenched before he steeled his features and cupped the boy's cheeks to make him look at his eyes forcefully. The village's snide and subtle remarks had gotten to him apparently, over the years, not that it wasn't expected due to their foolishness. But he had to clear his mind up right now. "I know you're no demon, Naruto, for a demon never gives a chance to its prey and kills them without remorse. The fact you gave them one even if they wish to die rather than take it and still grieve for what happened makes you more human than most in the world, son," he said calmly. Naruto calmed down to soft sniffles, hearing the years of experience and wise words laced in his voice. The concern in his eyes and the confidence that he was telling the truth, plus the fact that he called him the one thing that he had longed for hearing, made him break down again and hug his father figure for dear life. Tobirama rubbed his back for a few more moments before the arms hugging his chest went soft and he felt the boy no standing up only by his support on him. He smiled and scooped the boy up in his arms, who had finally been drained enough to be completely knocked out now, and disappeared in the death of the night. "Oh, make." Through the silent hallways of the ANBU HQ holding cells, a lone figure strolled by nonchalantly as if it were an amusement park for him. The man's face covered with his usual face mask and his lone eyes showing nothing but a lazy, aloof side to the man's casual appearance. It had been some time since Kakashi had retired from the ANBU, but he was still one of its most respected and looked up to retired members. So he had a bit of say and leverage to go in as he wanted to within their confines. Some previous ANBU that were once under him even approached him for some advice rather occasionally, seeing the man's impeccable record and fame among the Black Ops. So when he had apparently heard, that is, from outside the Hokage office's window. Not that he was quite brave, courageous, and completely stupid enough to actually venture in when the Uzumaki clan head was in one of her moods. He had come to know that all that sudden deployment and convergence of ANBU patrols was due to his cute little Genin's actions tonight. And Kushina's reason for throwing her tantrum was because he had apparently been arrested by some stupid and no doubt new member of the Black Ops. He tucked his hands in his pockets, searching for the living quarter where they had put his charge in and to take him out of there. What kind of a sensei would he be if he let his cute Genin be in here any while longer when he had such a caring and loving sensei for him? That was beside the point that he was still a couple of hours late. But that was a moot point and could be neglected. After all, he would be well taken care of in the most secure prison in the village. Right. Kakashi, what the hell are you doing here? Asked an annoyed voice of one Ibiki Marino who wasn't in one of his best moods, knowing what he would have to explain to the Hokage and then subsequently the council before they were scrutinized for their actions by those coots. Ibiki, just the man I wanted to see," he said in a nostalgic voice, making the man's frown deepen. He didn't like Kakashi one bit. He was quite possibly his least favorite person in the village. "What do you want?" he asked gruffly, making the Jounin give him his patented eye smile, much to the big man's annoyance. "You see, my Genin is under some confusion, been arrested by some newbie. So I thought I should cash in a favor from all of the other ones you owe me, remember?" he asked in his aloof voice, and Ibiki's frown turned into a full-blown scowl. Ibiki Marino, head of the ANBU Torture and Interrogation Unit, probably the scariest person alive for any captive shinobi and a master deceptive, was an excellent poker player too. He had beaten everyone in the village with his stone face, and his critical eye for discerning what makes a person tick had made him a magician with the cards. He had won against all other than Kakashi, that is. It was really hard to discern what a man was thinking when 3/4 of his face was hidden in cloth and his lone visible eye was always held half-lidded, containing all the mirth and aloofness in the world. In one word, he was Ibiki's kryptonite. He hated it when the Jounin beat him at the table and gave him that annoying crinkle of an eye he called a smile. And would rather leave than cashing up on his win, saying he would keep it as a favor for later. Apparently, today he wanted to cash in on one. "Let me guess, you want to get Namikaze out, don't you?" he asked dryly, making the Jounin eye smile. Ibiki's eye twitched. He had half a mind to rip his lone eye out to keep him from smiling again. He was probably the most hated person on his list, with now his student a close second. Like master, like pupil, he mused. "All right, here are the keys. You can take him. I suppose I know Sandaime won't be too keen on keeping him in any way. We'll just report him. He left after his orders," he said tiredly, not one to put up with twisting the rules, but he couldn't say no to Kakashi. He owed the man a lot, bets or not. Kakashi nodded and went down to the cell Ibiki had told him to. How his Genin would look up to him, his savior. He couldn't believe it. Maybe he might even squeeze out a favor and get a limited edition book from his godfather. Now that would be something, and the boy would most probably hug him to death for coming to his rescue. And then he would tell his teammates, who too would look up to him and worship the very ground he walked on. Oh, what a great teacher he was. Clink. Yo, Naruto. See, your sensei came too. Whiz. A breeze blew in the completely sealed-up room, which was quite comical if one might see, and the Jounin sweat dropped at seeing the cell devoid of any life. He checked the cell number and register again, but saw he was in the right one, which meant someone had come in and done the rescuing a little earlier. A few moments later, a scarecrow Jounin was crouched in the corner of the cell, drawing circles on the floor with a tear leaking down his lone eye. All his plans were ruined, and someone had cashed in on his idea an hour earlier. If only he hadn't embraced his friend's philosophies in life so to heart, then. "Obito, this time I don't like you," he whispered, sulking in his own tardiness when the cell accidentally closed with that imaginary breeze. The Jounin, unaware that he was locked in until someone came and got him out, just sulked in a corner at his failure to become a star in his Genin team's eyes. What a day it truly was.